Well, today on the show, we have Sharon Rizzo of the Rizzo Group from Coldwell Banker here in Chicago. If you're not yet familiar with Sharon, everyone in Chicago who's listening is already familiar, but for our listeners who aren't yet familiar with Sharon, who live elsewhere, let me tell you a little bit about her. Sharon Rizzo is a familiar name in Chicago real estate. Her 32-year career is peppered with professional accolades, multi-million dollar deals, and industry recognition among local and national developers. More recently, she was a Chicago Association of Realtors Golden Eagle winner, which basically means she was the top agent in the city. And by the way, we should mention, before I continue with Sharon's bio, there are 42,000 realtors in the Chicagoland area. So this is a big, big accomplishment. Sharon she did over 114 million in residential sales. In 2005, Sharon had more than 60 million in sales in 1 year, making her the number one agent in Lincoln Park. That same year, she co-founded a family-run brokerage with her husband, Santo, and their daughter, Kelly, which later evolved into the Rizzo Group. Now at your service through Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage. And I drive by her office every day on the way into my own office. And obviously, it's a little, the streets are a little less crowded at the moment. But excited to finally get Sharon Rizzo on the show. So Sharon, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Well, you're welcome, DJ. I'm thrilled to be here and good to know that you drive by the office all the time. We're one of the few offices that actually has a parking lot.
You have
We
a
have our
huge
own
parking lot.
parking
It's
lot.
the
I know. How cool is that?
and for our listeners, Lincoln Park is one of the most desired areas in all of Chicago, and parking is a massive premium.
Premium.
So you guys have the biggest parking lot of any real estate firm I've ever seen.
I know. Very thrilling. We're all happy about that for sure.
Well, tell us a little bit about you. You've been in real estate for such a long time and have such an
Oh
impressive
my gosh, for a long
CV.
time. I
Yeah,
know
tell us how
for
you got started.
I know I had sort of a weird background. I mean, not weird, but an unusual background in that I was an audiologist actually at the University of Chicago. So I said
Wow.
I'm great from the neck up. We treated a lot of hearing issues, but mostly I
Sure.
diagnosed hearing problems. And I had a part-time practice there. And then in my much younger days, I was under contract to Playboy Models and traveled about 100,000 miles a year, mostly as a narrator, model, spokesperson for major corporations,
Sure.
and got married and decided I wanted to have a family. And it probably wouldn't be a good idea to travel 100,000 miles a year with a young family. So I was looking for something not to replace the audiology necessarily, because that was a flexible part-time thing, but to replace the modeling. I was kind of done smiling and being on all the time. So I thought it was a good time. And my husband was with American Invesco at the time, which was
Sure.
sort of the condominium conversion king of the business. And he got me started and got me interested in sales, which I never thought I would be interested in.
Yeah.
And little by little, I eased into it completely, became a sales manager for them, gave up my practice at the University of Chicago, and became a full-time realtor. Was also working for NBC a little bit as a broadcaster. So I gave that up as well. And I've been in real estate the rest of my entire career up until
Wow.
now.
Yeah, right. Everything's changed, but of course, I'm sure you're still trucking along. You have a huge team. We should mention Sharon's team is 15 people at this point, 15 realtors, and may even be growing in the future. But can you tell us a little bit about why you developed a team? Was there a need at some point where business just became so big and constant that you needed additional help?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. I had been a sales manager in general brokerage for many years anyway, so I was used to managing
Sure.
a large group of people. So it was kind of natural for me. And little by little, I found that people sort of wanted to join, and it just really grew organically as a result. We were also working on some special projects that really required more people than just what my husband and myself could accommodate. So it grew little by little, and now we have a team of 15, and they are really a diverse, terrific group. I can't speak highly enough of the team. We're very excited. And the sales manager at Coldwell Banker has been so supportive and just terrific. So it's been a great opportunity for us with Coldwell Banker.
Yeah, I am curious to know, and I'm sure our listeners would be curious to know, since you're the head of this big team, how are you, what are you talking to your team about these days? Since we know right now, while we're recording this, probably most of the country is still under a stay-at-home order. Real estate agents are likely at home most of the day as well. How are you and your team staying busy? What are you guys doing to keep the business running and growing?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because tomorrow for first Zoom virtual team meeting with all 15 members, and really going to see how they're doing. Of course, I've kept in touch with them individually anyway. But they are doing virtual open houses, virtual showings, literally wearing masks and protective gear, going up, showing homes when applicable. Sometimes we specialize a lot in condominiums, of course, being a downtown broker, and some buildings do not permit you to even come in.
Yeah,
Some buildings aren't even, believe it or not, permitting move-ins and move-outs, which I was a little surprised at. But
yeah.
most of it has been virtually. However, one thing that we're trying to get everyone to focus on right now is what is out there that's a really good investment. Because if you can find some really good investments right now, and there are quite a few, it's I think an easier time to get people focused on that, to get buyers focused on that right now. So we're really working on that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about investments, because I know that's a particular passion of yours, to educate other agents about wealth building through real estate investments. So can you talk a little bit about, how you started? Obviously, with your history, you would have come across investors along the way, but why is this such a passion for you?
Well, we started out in condominium conversions. American Invesco was very well known for
Yeah,
converting major high rises like Lake Point Tower,
sure.
Millennium Center, even, which was new construction, which was a little bit different. And because of that, because you have to have a 50% pre-sale, for
Yeah,
example, in most of those buildings, to get that, you really have to focus on investors. And that was very, very popular at the time, because interest rates were not as low as they are now, which is another reason to be focusing on it, but enough to where you had very little negative cash flow with about 20% down. And so it was very, very easy and very popular to get investors to buy in condominiums, especially in a conversion, because you had a renter already built in. So we started focusing on that very early on, and really focusing not so much on selling the real estate per se, but rather what the real estate did for you.
sure.
For example, giving you the, let's say, a vacation home that you've always wanted, or sending the kids to college, or whatever additional, an independent retirement, for example. So we
Sure.
always focused on what the real estate could do for you rather than the real estate per se. And we were able to build up a very large body of investors that we had, that we were also able to refer to some of our team. So that has been very, very, very a big part of our business from the very beginning, and still is.
Yeah, I've always thought that real estate, if it would done with the way you were mentioning as an investment, is really an annuity at that point, and hopefully a cash flow positive annuity. But now, with rates being as low as they are, it really creates a lot more opportunities. And I wanted to ask you this, because we've had a lot of guests on the show over the years who are real estate investors, and so it seems that, and then of course with my own experience with the realtors at our own firm, we have a lot of investors here as well. And it seems that the prevailing thought, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the audience who might not be working with investments or investors, that a lot of times a realtor might think, or a listener might think, well, I don't know any investors. And from everyone I've ever talked to, and Sharon, I want to get your thoughts on this, is that the guests will always often say, well, that's actually the easy part. Finding the investor isn't difficult, because there's lots of people that are cash flow heavy, or cash heavy rather, that are ready to get a 7 to 9% return,
Exactly.
if that's possible. But finding the deal is the challenge. Like, don't worry about the investors; they'll show up. find the deal first, and then, typically the finding the money is the easier part. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And I think that what's interesting to look at is pre-2008.
Yeah.
When the market crashed, if you will, pre-2008, the interest rates were like 7.5% in like 2005, 2006. So if you put, say, 10% down as an investor and you could get that financing, then you would have a significant negative cash flow.
Yeah.
But because real estate has always appreciated, from the very beginning, even in the 1980s when it went up to 20%, there was a little bump for sure for a few years, but it jumped right back up. So we never had that big, huge dip that we did in 2008. So you always banked on appreciation and
Sure.
didn't care really about the negative cash flow. So in 2008, however,
Yeah.
that became a problem, and people were that's when you had a lot of short sales and foreclosures because people could not support it. But now, with interest rates literally being less than half of what they were in pre-2008, now you can put 20% down and not have a negative cash flow. So even if there were a problem down the line, which we don't anticipate that to happen again like it did in 2008, because a lot of those problems have been connected, like giving a loan to someone who had a pulse.
Right.
And yeah, right. So as a result of that, you don't have a negative cash flow. So you're not going to have that kind of a problem that you did with teaser rates that they were giving pre-2008. And then all of a sudden you were left with maybe a $2,000 a month negative cash flow on a $300,000 purchase. And a lot of people couldn't support it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too about working with investors or investment groups is that right now, whereas, realtors aren't as easily able to show properties, a lot of times investors don't need to see the property anyway, right? They just want to look at the numbers. And what a great opportunity, with rates being as low as they are, to find those deals and present those to them.
Exactly. They will buy sight unseen, especially with a good virtual tour. Even if you have to do it subject to seeing it down the line, lock in the deal now. That I was able to do 4 of them, as a matter of fact, in the past couple weeks, sight unseen, just because of the very low interest rates and some of the great deals that are out there right now. You have to look for them, but they are there.
So this is a good question, and I'm gonna ask you a difficult question that I know is one that could have an hour-long answer, but wanted to get some tips from you for our listeners who haven't yet started to work with investors or find investments, but any ideas about how they can start to educate themselves on different opportunities, where to search for properties. Obviously, the MLS is one area, but then there's a lot of properties that never hit the MLS for investment purposes. So just some suggestions to our listeners, if you don't mind, about how they could start to educate about how this all works.
No, absolutely not, DJ. I think that, first of all, I'd love to find B buildings in A+ locations.
Sure.
And there are quite a few of those in River North. High-rise condominiums where they're pretty maintenance-free. You really can, as an investor, purchase something in one of those buildings and really not have to worry too much about it. They have large staffs, an engineer, maintenance person on site in many cases. And they're also priced right in that sweet spot. Excuse me, can't believe
No problem.
that. My goodness, in that sweet spot, right around say $250,000 to $350,000.
Sure.
Where 1 bedrooms, I generally suggest 1 bedrooms in that $250,000 to $350,000 range in a B building in an A+ location. There are a lot of them, and you will find that you will have very little, if any, negative cash flow, with sometimes even 10% down if you can get that kind of financing. Right now, 20% down for investors, maybe 25 is easy. 20 you can get if you look for it. And it's that would be my advice, is to stick in that sweet spot between 250, 350,000, generally a one bedroom, maybe a studio, where you're going to go down into the, say, 170 to $210,000 range, and in a major high rise, but maybe one that's a little bit older, but again, in a great location that's always going to be sought after. Can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, that's very true. And we have to remember too that right now, I mean, with investments, the lending is a little bit different, right? So you're putting probably more down and the rates are slightly higher than if it's a
Yes,
non-investment,
yes,
but they're
yes.
still so incredibly low.
Exactly. You are going to pay a little bit more, but they're still way low to where it reduces your negative cash flow to virtual. Well, when you consider the tax break and
Yeah.
depreciation, actually, it's probably going to be a slight positive cash flow, which was not the case pre-2008.
That's very true. So for everyone listening, by the way, there's a great resource I always recommend to get some incredible knowledge. It's probably about the best resource online. It's called biggerpockets.com. It's the largest forum for real estate investors. And they just chat back and forth all day, and they have podcasts and books and all sorts of wonderful things. But go to Bigger Pockets, and it's a wonderful education because it'll connect you with other investors, but also just people talking investments all day.
See, now I'm learning something. I
Well,
didn't
you
know.
don't need any in education.
No,
So,
trust me, I can always stand to learn something, but I have to remember that. That's really good to know.
well, and you know, and obviously you don't only work with investors too. You work with traditional buyers,
Oh,
sellers,
sure.
renters. Can you talk a little bit do you mind sharing a little bit about how your team is structured? Is everyone working with their own clients, or is it a collaborative approach where there's different roles? How do you guys have it set up?
Well, I would say we're kind of flexible on that. Everybody certainly works with their own clients.
Sure.
They work both rentals, sales, absolutely. But right now we are working on some special projects that involve condominium deconversions. Now,
Yeah.
if someone had told me a few years ago, I didn't even know what that word meant.
Right.
Condominium deconversion. How could you ever
Yeah.
deconvert a
Yeah.
large building from a
Right.
condominium to a rental when our specialty had been converting them from rentals to
Yeah.
condominiums? I mean, it's just unbelievable what has happened in the past 5 years. And we have been consultants for a company who has specialized in condominium deconversions, and we've gotten our entire team involved in that. So that's some an additional avenue for them, in addition to just general brokerage and having the support of a major company like Coldwell Banker and our sales manager, who's been very active as well in helping to support the team.
I wanted to ask as well about rentals. So you've been a broker for so long, and I'm curious. And there's a lot of realtors who get their license or who are, building their business, and maybe they're starting out, and they're going, "Well, I didn't get my broker license to do rentals, right? I want to do big sales, but maybe they don't have a lot of sales right now, which probably most brokers don't when they start out." And so I've always recommended to brokers who have the time to do it to do rentals, because not only can those people turn into buyers down the road, which hopefully they will,
Exactly.
but you can, learn it's a more immediate type of transaction. So there's not as long of a lead time. Also, it gets you introduced to real estate, the local real estate market, and you can start to learn, of course, of the different buildings that support apartments. But just curious on what your thoughts are on rentals. Like right now, I know the rental market is, well, we're supposed to be right in the middle of rental market. Of course, things have slowed a bit with stay at home, but right now in Chicago, normally this would be the biggest rental time of the year. And just curious your thoughts on rentals.
Well, first of all, I totally agree with you. I think it's a great way to get started, especially for a new agent, because it takes a while. By the time
Yeah.
you make your first sale, even if you're doing pretty well, it could be 4 to 6 months. Where with a rental, You get paid very, very quickly. Like you say, you learn the market, you learn the ropes very, very quickly. I think that that's a great way to get started, particularly for a new agent. So we highly recommend it. We have a lot of people on our team who do rentals to support particularly the investors. When we have such a big investment base that we have to get involved with the rental market to make sure that you're doing full service real estate and giving them the proper service that they need. So it is great for full service realty as well as getting new agents up and running in the business.
I also wanted to ask you about open houses. So right now, open houses have changed. There's probably no open houses at the moment, but when things get back to normal, and of course they will, hopefully sooner rather than later, but that'll yet to be seen. But when things do resume to normal, how important have you found open houses to be? Obviously, from helping the seller, get more marketing exposure to the property, but also from a broker's perspective, going in and possibly finding buyers to then work with on other properties. Is that an important part of what your team focuses on with listings?
I think it's important for the seller, for sure.
Yes.
And I think it's obviously part of our marketing strategy, assuming that the seller wants a public open house.
Sure.
Some sellers do not.
Right.
I do think what is very important is a broker's open house.
Yeah.
For listings. And so we always encourage that. And very few sellers would not want you to have a broker's open, but you want to expose as many other brokers to the property as possible. I never count on the fact that I'm going to sell the property through an open house.
Sure.
But I certainly want to expose it. And also other brokers will come to an open house, and you still may sell it through another broker through an open house. So I think it's important on many levels because of that.
That's a really good point, Sharon, and I'm so glad you mentioned the Brokers Open House, because I think you may be our first guest that's talked about that, believe it or not, and we've done 150 some episodes. So I want to circle back to that. So for everyone listening, there is the opportunity to do open houses just for brokers is something that is somewhat popular here in Chicago, and in your local market it may or may not be. But what a great opportunity to get other realtors. I mean, it is called a cooperative commission, right? So
yes, it is. It is.
So let's cooperate, but
for a reason.
But the most successful agents that I have known, when they started out, and maybe even they still do, although of course right now things are paused, but when times are more normalized, the most successful agents I know go to those broker opens. They want to see what the inventory looks like, because then they look more professional and more knowledgeable to their own clients. So hosting open houses just for brokers is a wonderful and smart idea. And the people that show up are typically going to be successful agents that want to see what else is out there. So great suggestion.
Absolutely. I think the Brokers Open is really the most important. I think it's actually more important than the typical Sunday open houses.
Wow.
To be honest, I really do. On many levels, you'll find that brokers who are very experienced, they want to know what's out there on the market, particularly if there's a shortage. If they're working with a specific client, they want to preview it. And what a great way to preview it without asking for an appointment without a client. And it's also a great way for new agents. So new people on my team, for example, that's one way that you encourage them to learn the market, to learn what the inventory is out there, and to meet other brokers and establish relationships. So it has many far-reaching advantages beyond just the open house. But the primary reason is to expose that property to as many brokers as possible, because they all are working with clients.
Yes.
So it's very, very important. And there is a particular day, and it's usually Tuesday from say 10 to 2. You can pick hours within that time frame where it's actually advertised on the MLS.
That's right.
Right. And brokers look there and they want to know what is out there, particularly if they're working with a client and they want to preview it. They can go back to their client and say, I saw the perfect property for you. You've got to see this. So it's very important.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. And thank you for that information. And also think, as everyone who's listening, let's think about the the value proposition to the seller to be able to say, you know, I'm actually going to do two types of open houses for you. One is going to be for the, and I'm assuming that's what they want, but say, you know, one of course will be for buyers to come in and view the property, but I'm also going to do a private open house just for other agents in our area because I want to I want them to see this property. And by the way, so you guys understand, of course, that conversation, but I would almost bet that if you are up against another agent, you're both doing listing presentations, they're maybe looking at 2 or 3 brokers, who to go with. Somebody who says, here's why I'm going to do 2 different kinds, that is number one, going to separate you from probably the other brokers that you're in competition with, but also it's just a really good idea on top of it to help get more exposure to the property.
Yes, I agree with you. And one other thing that I stress with my team is not using lockboxes unless you absolutely have to, particularly if it's a property. In certain instances, you can. If it's a vacant property, for example, but if it's a higher end property, I still see brokers using using lockboxes all the time, even on $1 million property. And nobody knows that property better than other than the seller, than the listing agent, because you've made it your business to know it. Obviously, you need to show that property. And if a seller is going to hire you specifically to do it, then you should do it and not just let someone walk in on their own when they don't understand what the highlights of the property are. There might be a lot about that property that an agent just walking in, even the best agent walking in, they would likely not know. So it's very important, and that's what can separate you sometimes, is you say, I'm going to be there whenever possible to show that property, in person. I'm not going to rely just on a lockbox, because why would you be hiring me if you're going to use a lockbox all the time?
They could get their own lockbox. And
exactly.
No, it's a very fair point. And I know this is a debate in the real estate community, probably nationwide, about should I go to my own showings for my listings? And some people say, most brokers, I think, would agree that's a good idea. But that's the conversation you can have with the buyer's agent and say, hey, just so you know, I prefer to be there. I can stay out of the way. I won't interfere, but I want to make sure I answer those questions so that you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer's agent, don't feel the pressure to have to know everything about this property. I'm going to be your resource. We're working together. Your clients won't feel uncomfortable, but I want to make sure that I can present the property in the way that you don't have to feel the pressure to know everything. So
Exactly. And particularly if it's a higher end, larger property, it becomes even more important. And you might do a lockbox on a vacant unit, even if it's higher end, in the event, let's say someone is passing by and they want to see it right then and it's impossible for you to get there, and it's a broker who might be familiar with the property, that would be a reason to do it. But for the most part, I try to separate myself on a listing presentation by saying that I want to be there for all the showings to sell the property rather than just show it.
Absolutely, could not agree more. What a great suggestion. And for right now, for everyone who's not going to a showing, you could tell the other agent, if they're still going with their client and you're unable to go, or you're at a stay-at-home order, you could say, well, if you want, put me on FaceTime and I'll be there, and I at least can answer questions as your client walks through. But what a great suggestion. I'm so grateful that you
and so many people, you mentioned FaceTime, and of course so many agents are using FaceTime now. They'll go through the property and use FaceTime with their clients during this time, especially with the lockdown. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes, it's this virtual world. It's funny.
Can we recruit you on our team?
Well, I work just down the street. I'm only a couple blocks from you, so I'm pretty close by. It's funny. I've always, now people who are listening can't see this, but for everyone watching, you will be able to see this. I am normally in a a tie and a shirt and suit
Ooh.
pants. And it's been kind of nice for the last month that we're at stay at home. Even though I'm going into the office, I can dress down a bit. So I'm actually quite excited not to be so formally dressed. It's a lot more
Casual
comfortable.
and fun.
Yeah, yeah. So I apologize for everyone watching this and seeing that I'm a slightly dressed down. But it's as soon as the stay-at-home order is lifted, I'll be back to my tie and my uncomfortable shirt and tie. But
But jeans on the bottom, right?
well, I would love that. I do bring my dog to the office, so she's underneath the desk. So
Oh.
that's a lot of fun. But Sharon, I wanted to also ask. You have seen so many brokers. And when I say broker, for everyone listening, of course, different parts of the country call real estate professionals different titles. Here in Illinois, everyone's a broker. So if I say the word broker and you're like, I don't know what that means, or that only means people who own their own firm in Chicago or in Illinois, rather, that's everyone's. So I should just say realtor or real estate professional. But you've seen a lot of real estate professionals start their business, become successful. I'm sure you've seen other agents struggle and maybe even leave the industry without having the success they want. For anyone who's looking to get to the to the next level, whether it's just, hey, I did 3 sales last year, I want to get to 6, or I did 30 sales last year, I want to get to 60, or whatever those numbers might be. Do you have any suggestions for what agents could do right now when we're all stuck at home, we're not able to as freely walk around and drive around? What would you suggest to help agents, grow their business?
That is a great question. And the first thing I say is don't be a secret agent, which I think
Yes.
a lot of agents tend to be. You have to remember, think sales 24/7. And it's funny, normally, if we were not in this lockdown, I would say one of the first things is to get out to a good networking group. But I think
Yes.
we will sort of skip that right now.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know whether I'm coming back to the investments all the time, but this is a great time to do that because you are less likely to have your potential buyer, have to see the property in person if you can give them a good virtual tour, because it is more about the numbers
Right.
and what the potential upside is of this particular property. So I think it would be a great time to look through the MLS, pick some great, again, B buildings in an A+ location, and come up with some investments from studios to 1 bedrooms, perhaps to start in that $175,000 up to $300,000 range. You're going to find, if you do your numbers with 20%, 25% down, you very likely will not have a negative cash flow, and the returns are great. And come up with maybe 4 or 5 properties and try to link them up with some people who have some cash to put down, maybe even more, and could do a cash deal, which would be even better. And I think that's a great thing to do during this particular time, as opposed to somebody who's actually going to live in the property, because it may be a little tougher right now for that.
I think you're right. So Sharon's saying, start studying real estate investments. It's a great opportunity for you to add that to your skill set. So if you're a realtor who is traditionally just working with buyers and sellers, non-investors, this is a great time to add this, because the worst thing to happen is to a real estate agent, unless they're just so incredibly busy, they're happy to pass off a transaction to another agent. But if you're not that busy, what you never want to happen is somebody to say, I actually want to do some investing. And you say, oh, that's not really what I know or I do. And I have to now refer you out, which is okay, of course. But to spend this time that we probably all have a little bit more time than we have had in the past, to start to increase that knowledge so that you can service those customers, because you're missing out.
Exactly. It's a great way. You can create your own deal here,
Yes.
and I think that is so important. You can create your own deal rather than waiting for somebody who has to sell a home, which is a little tough right now, or waiting for the buyer who has to see a home because they're buying a property for them, which is a little different mindset. Of course, it's still an investment. and it's still important to focus on that, but it's different when you're focusing strictly on numbers. And this is a great time to create your own deal by doing that, where you're focusing on the numbers and matching up someone you know with a particular property downtown, pretty much like I was talking about in River North with the A plus location, B property.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, so our listeners are not only real estate professionals, we also have buyers, sellers, investors as well who listen to the show. We're really fortunate to have a lot of listeners who listen to every episode. So if anyone is looking for a real estate professional who has a tremendous amount of experience, one of the top agents production-wise here in Chicago, and has a team as well as a company, a wonderful company that's supporting her. What if somebody wants to work with you or anyone on your team, Sharon, what's the best way they should reach out to you?
Well, I think they could certainly look us up, obviously, through Coldwell Banker's website.
Sure.
I can be reached, and I'm happy to also introduce anybody to someone on my team who I think might fit that person's needs really well. We have all different age range. We're a very diverse team, and I'm really proud of these people. But my email, for example, is sharon.rizzo@cbexchange.com. That would be the best way.
Yeah, definitely reach out to Sharon. Her team is always growing, and they're doing more deals after more deals year after year. And not only that, but just the amount of information and knowledge and the generosity that Sharon has and provides to her team is well known here in Chicago. So definitely, whether you're an individual looking for an agent, or maybe even you're somebody who's looking to see what teams are offering as for other realtors, definitely reach out to Sharon to see how that all happens. But Sharon, I think this is a great place for us to pause and to I would like, on behalf of Sharon and myself, to thank our listeners for continuing to support our show, listening. We ask always just two quick favors from our listeners. One is, think of another real estate professional that could benefit from hearing this great interview you just heard from Sharon, and please pass this over to them. They can always visit our website, which is keepingitrealpod.com. And stream every episode we've ever done. I think this is probably our 156th or so episode. So we have this huge history of a huge backlog in the library of content that they can go through. But also the second thing is, we ask you to everyone to please follow us on Facebook. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/keepingitrealpod. In addition to posting, of course, all of our episodes, we also every day find an article online written by some institution designed to help realtors grow their business. So we try to provide great content there as well. But on behalf of the listeners and myself, Sharon, we want to thank you for being part of our show. You are one of the, when I first started this about 4 years ago, you were at the very top of our list of short list of guests that were in our dream guest list. And we're so grateful to finally got you on the show, and appreciate, I know how busy you are. So I really appreciate your time. And thank you for being part of it. And on behalf of Sharon and myself, we want to thank again the audience, and we will see everybody on our next episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you, DJ. It was an absolute pleasure to be on your show, and I'm thrilled that you thought of me. Thank you so much.
Well, we'll see everyone next time. Thank you.
Thank you.